When I was in college, my beautiful girlfriend, who is now my beautiful wife, borrowed my 1984 Toyota Tercel, which was very old even at that point, and she drove it into the back of somebody else's SUV. It wasn't a big deal. I mean, my wife has magnificent hair, massive hair, and I think it was the ginormousness of her curly hair that absorbed most of the impact of her head on the windshield. But it was a big enough accident that it kind of freaked us out. We didn't wear seatbelts at that point. I don't know why. I just grew up in a rural area. Maybe this is a total side note, but we just didn't wear seatbelts. After that, we've worn seatbelts every single day for the rest of our lives and had our kids do that as well. So it's a relatively low-cost learning experience. And the people in front of us, they were driving a big 1990s wealthy North Shore of Chicago suburban tank. I mean, they barely even felt it. But wow, did my little Toyota Tercel not handle that impact well. So it was done. We had to get a new vehicle, right? So dating this girl, there are pretty significant boundaries because we were taking it seriously. Like, I really thought she was the one from the get-go, and I think she suspected the same thing about me. So we were usually really smart with how we drew everything up, but the story I'm about to tell you is an exception. She got to thinking, well, I wrecked your car. I owe you a car. And I got to thinking, you wrecked my car. You kind of owe me a car because that's a huge commodity in the North Shore of Chicago. When you're a college student, none of that part of the world is walkable. It's all built with commuting in mind. You don't really need a car at college. But I don't want my girlfriend to buy me a new car. This could mess up everything. It feels punitive, and I got to find another way, but I didn't have that much money because I'm a full-time student. I'm on scholarship for sports, so I got to play ball and all of that stuff. Eventually, what we cooked up was this scheme where we would be lightly boyfriend and girlfriend, but we would take out this loan together and buy a car. Well, if I was going to buy a new car, I wanted it to be cool. So I got a Dodge Daytona, and it was cool. It didn't work super well, I guess. I think somebody just threw a bunch of junk in the gas tank or something. That's why I got it so cheap. I don't think I ever really got that fixed. But it looked cool. It was the coolest looking car I'd ever had. I got a customized license plate on it because back then that was real cheap in Illinois. It said Mile High 6 because I'm from Colorado, and my baseball number is 6. I felt awesome as a 19-year-old about that decision. It obviously is an utterly stupid decision from top to, I mean, everything about it is just moronic as we look back on it now. And I hope you're laughing at me because I deserve it. So we go home for Christmas break, and Camilla is like, okay, well, how many hours are you going to work over Christmas break? I'm like, what? Who are you? We're just dating. What? You don't get to decide how many hours I work. I'll work enough. My part of the payment is $35 every month. I'll come up with it. You don't worry about where that's going to come from. And then I realized, that doesn't really work. I understand why she's worried about it. Oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. I'm putting pressure on this relationship. I want her to be the one. I want this to work. And so I got rid of the car, and it was the right call, of course. Lesson learned, probably. My parents came through. They kept an eye out for a car, and they had some friends that were getting rid of, I don't know what year, like a 1980 Dodge Colt. And this thing was an absolute trash bin. It was horrible. It was so ugly. It was so crappy. It was so uncomfortable. The stereo was garbage, but it was free. So we sold the Daytona. I think we got our money back out of it. I was sad to see it go. I still have the customized plates from that. I don't know why. And I started driving this really ugly, paint chipped, nasty, worst car on campus, Dodge Colt. And I remember I was like, all right, I'm going to make the best of this thing. It was pretty dirty when I got it. So I cleaned it all up, washed it, made it look great. And I parked it there outside the dorm. I looked at it in the sunlight, and I was like, all right, there's my car. I own it, free and clear. And I cleaned it up. It smells better. There that is. But there was something inside of me that was like, but 3 days ago, I was driving a Dodge Daytona, and it had personalized plates and comfy seats, and it looked awesome. And I was happy, but not fully satisfied. I guess I just wanted to tell that story. That's some of your time that you're never, ever, ever going to get back. There is a likewise here, and here is the likewise. That scenario is kind of what we run into in Ezra chapter 3 in this really sad passage where Solomon's beautiful temple that is the place where God dwelt among his people, got destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. And the people who used that temple to commune with God, worship God, offer sacrifices to God, they got taken away into captivity. Total calamity. And now here we are 60 to 70 years later. Math is hard, something like that. And Cyrus the Great has issued an edict to say, go rebuild the thing. And they've made their way back, and there's resistance all around them from the hill people who don't like that the Jews have received the favor of Cyrus, and they start to rebuild the temple, and they lay the foundation, and they just don't have money like they had back during the time of King Solomon. That was the apex of wealth in the history of the ancient Jewish people. They would never enjoy a moment like that of prosperity and dominance culturally ever again. Just one generation, one king's worth of time. But during that time, King Solomon called in all the favors and all the business dealings in the whole ancient world to build a temple that was beyond compare, resplendent, remarkable, described in great detail multiple times in the Bible. For crying out loud, they even named the pillars on that temple. It was so fancy. And then it got destroyed. And now, with the money they were able to get from Cyrus's generosity, here they are undertaking a new building project with people who are still old enough that they can barely remember what the old temple was like. And now the time has come that the foundations have been laid to get everybody together and be like, hey, here's what we got done. This is going to be the footprint of our new temple. And, well, it plays out a lot like that moment for me in the dorm parking lot with my Dodge Colt that wasn't very impressive, but it's something, and it's mine, and it's what I can afford, and it's what I've got. Here's how it sounds in Ezra chapter 3. Verse 10, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments and with trumpets, and the Levites, the son of Asaph, with cymbals took their places to praise the Lord as prescribed by David, king of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love to Israel endures forever. It's pretty awesome so far, right? And I think especially for the people who've never even seen a temple before, this has got to be the payoff to everything. This is the grand reversal. And I'm sure they meant every last word of he is good, his love to Israel endures forever. I'm sure that was the most natural, automatic thing for them to sing with no conflictedness in their hearts. But as we read on, we're going to see that some people remembered the Dodge Daytona. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because of the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid, which is awesome. It is awesome. And surely everybody was happy that that had happened. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. Let's operate off of the assumption that God is behind this document and is behind these events and is orchestrating history, which is such a key theme of Ezra and Nehemiah, and especially Daniel, and especially Esther, the 4 books that really get us into this Persia era that we're looking at. So let's just assume that. And if so, that raises a question for me. Why couldn't God have just waited another 20 years to let a generation die off so that it could just be joyous and enthusiastic and not mixed? We see that that's a tool that God uses at other times. Remember the Exodus from Egypt? God was like, yeah, we're just not going to be able to go take the land until everybody from this generation has died off, and it'll be the next generation who does it. That might sound mean, but I guess if you're God and you're the master of history and you know how things ought to be, you know how to build it out the right way. Yet, assuming God ordained all of this and he is the master of history and he is in charge of the story that we're looking at here in this document, it's very interesting that God instead elected to time this in such a way that this mixed reaction would occur. My theory is that the Old Testament is meant to demonstrate the long-sufferingness of God, God's desire to redeem, and how his redemptive plan won't be thwarted by anyone, an enemy, or even a friend who just screws things up all the time. God is going to see the thing through, And the point never was just one people group and their narrative, though that is a very important part of the plot, an important part of how God does this thing. The point was redemption for the whole world, and to demonstrate that even if a people group had God fully in their corner and working things for their benefit and explaining how things are, they still, because of the human heart and the sinful nature, they still could not uphold their end of the bargain, and a new covenant would be needed. The whole Old Testament begs for the new covenant, the new deal that happens with Jesus, who comes and lives a sinless life and goes to the cross as a sacrifice for the sins of humanity and is the first fruits of defeating death and is risen back to life and establishes his kingdom and all of that stuff that we talked about so very, very much in the book of Matthew. And I think that if God waits just a little bit longer to have this whole thing unfold, maybe there would be generational forgetfulness about what they had and about those little moments here and there and about how eager God was to bless this endeavor. But why isn't the foundation of the temple as big as it was before? I mean, the cheap answer is economics, but the bigger answer is societal rot. Corruption. If you think I'm being too harsh on the Jewish people of 2,600 years ago, just go reread 1st and 2nd Kings. Go reread 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They're both a crystal clear story of the covenant deal not being upheld by God's chosen people, but God being faithful anyway. I think the reaction that the attentive reader is supposed to come away from the entire Old Testament with is one that is really similar to the reaction of the people to the laying of the foundation of this second temple in Ezra chapter 3. I think the reaction is supposed to be shouts of joy and wailing. It's supposed to be exultation over the character of God and consistency of God and how the redemptive plan cannot be derailed. Thank God for that. But also, I think you're supposed to feel empathy and collegiality with all the people who screwed everything up. You're not supposed to read it and be like, I never would have done that. I am good and different from them. You're supposed to read it and deep down be like, I might not have done the stupid thing on that page, but on this page right over here, yeah, I would have done that stupid thing. I totally would have gone for that. This is going to have to be something where God does all of the lift, not just the heavy part of the lift, all of it. It's going to have to be a new covenant, a new deal, because humanity cannot get out of its own way. And I think we get a beautiful and tragic metaphor for that right here in this picture of the dedication of the second temple. All of that said, it's still a temple, and the sacrificial system is going to be restored. So that's pretty exciting. God used to live in his temple. And there was a physical demonstration that he showed up when that happened. I mean, maybe we'll get this new temple finished up and God will show up and there'll be miracles and stuff that'll make it super obvious that his presence is here with us again. I mean, there's still reason for optimism. I mean, it was a Dodge Daytona and that was really cool looking, but the Dodge Colt's still a car. It still works, gets around. It's still pretty good. It'll get it done. But truth to be told, even if you try to put lipstick on it and frame it really optimistically, you still have to acknowledge that the cultural memory of that better thing that was before is still there. And the reminder that you got some things wrong to get to the place where you're at now, even if you are now in the rebuilding process, that still lingers. That living lesson about previous mistakes is still sitting right there. And every time these old guys who remember the old temple look at the footprint of the new temple, they're going to think about exactly how they got there. And so mourning, I guess, to some extent makes sense here. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.